Fellow gardeners, let me tell you about the summer I lost my entire squash harvest to what I thought was just bad luck. I'd been growing vegetables for years, feeling pretty confident about my green thumb, when suddenly my beautiful, promising squash plants turned into a graveyard of wilted stems and rotting fruit. That devastating season taught me that squash growing isn't just about planting seeds and hoping for the best. It's about understanding the specific needs of these vigorous yet surprisingly delicate plants. After that humbling experience, I dove deep into understanding what went wrong and discovered that most squash failures aren't due to bad weather or poor soil alone. They're the result of 5 critical mistakes that even experienced gardeners make repeatedly. Today, I'm sharing these hard-learned lessons with you because I don't want you to go through the heartbreak of watching your squash dreams crumble like mine did. Here's the thing about squash plants that caught me completely off guard during my early gardening days. They're absolute space hogs. When you see those tiny seeds or compact seedlings, it's nearly impossible to imagine just how massive these plants become. I used to think I was being generous, giving each plant 2 feet of space. Boy, was I wrong. Squash plants, especially winter varieties like butternut and acorn, can easily spread 6 to 8 feet in every direction. Summer squash like zucchini might seem more manageable, but they still need at least 4 feet between plants. When you crowd them together, you're essentially creating a perfect storm of problems that will haunt you all season long. Overcrowded plants compete fiercely for nutrients, water, and sunlight. The result? Weak, stressed plants that become magnets for pests and diseases. Poor air circulation in crowded plantings creates the humid, stagnant conditions that fungal diseases absolutely love. I learned this the hard way when my tightly packed squash bed became a breeding ground for powdery mildew that spread faster than gossip in a small town. The solution is simple, but requires discipline. Give your squash plants the room they deserve. For bush varieties, plan for at least 4 feet between plants. For vining types, you'll need 6 to 8 feet, or consider training them vertically with sturdy trellises. Yes, it means fewer plants in your garden, but trust me, 3 healthy, productive plants will give you far more squash than 10 struggling, diseased ones. Timing is everything in squash growing, and this is where many gardeners stumble right out of the gate. Squash plants are warm-season crops that absolutely despise cold soil and chilly nights. I've watched countless gardeners plant their squash too early, thinking they're getting a head start on the season, only to see their plants sulk, grow slowly, or simply give up entirely. The magic number you need to remember is 65 degrees Fahrenheit. That's the minimum soil temperature your squash seeds need to germinate properly. Plant them in soil that's cooler than this, and you're essentially asking them to perform miracles. Cold soil leads to poor germination, weak seedlings and plants that never quite recover from their rough start. But here's the kicker. Even if your soil is warm enough, nighttime air temperatures below 50 degrees Fahrenheit can shock your squash plants and set them back significantly. I learned this during a particularly unpredictable spring, when late frost warnings had me scrambling to protect my prematurely planted squash with row covers and buckets. The key is patience. Wait until both soil and air temperatures are consistently warm. In most regions, this means planting 2 to 3 weeks after your last frost date. If you're itching to get started early, try starting seeds indoors about 3 weeks before your planned transplant date. This gives you healthy, robust seedlings ready to hit the ground running when conditions are perfect. Water management might be the most misunderstood aspect of squash growing. These plants are, well, simultaneously thirsty and finicky about how they receive their water. Get it wrong, and you'll face a cascade of problems that can destroy your entire crop. The most common watering mistake I see is the feast or famine approach. You know what I'm talking about, letting the soil dry out completely, then flooding the plants with water when you remember them. This inconsistent watering pattern stresses the plants terribly and leads to one of the most frustrating problems in squash growing: blossom end rot. Blossom end rot shows up as dark, sunken spots on the ends of your developing squash. It's not a disease, it's a calcium deficiency caused by inconsistent water uptake. When soil moisture fluctuates wildly, plants can't absorb calcium properly, even if there's plenty in the soil. I've seen gardeners frantically add calcium supplements to their soil, wondering why the problem persists, when the real issue is their watering schedule. The solution is deep, consistent watering. Squash plants need about 1 to 2 inches of water per week, delivered slowly and deeply. I prefer soaker hoses or drip irrigation because they deliver water directly to the root zone without wetting the leaves. Wet foliage is an invitation for fungal diseases, and trust me, you don't want to deal with powdery mildew or downy mildew on your squash plants. Mulching is your secret weapon here. A thick layer of organic mulch around your plants helps maintain consistent soil moisture, reduces watering frequency, and keeps those spreading vines off the bare soil where they're more susceptible to rot and pest damage. If you wait until you see problems on your squash plants, you're already behind the 8 ball. Successful squash growing requires a proactive approach to pest and disease management, not a reactive one. This was perhaps the hardest lesson I learned during my squash growing journey. The squash bug and cucumber beetle are two of the most devastating pests you'll encounter. These aren't just nuisances, they're crop destroyers that can wipe out your entire planting if left unchecked. Squash bugs inject a toxin that literally kills plant tissue, while cucumber beetles spread bacterial wilt, a disease that can kill plants in days. Early detection is crucial. I make it a habit to inspect my squash plants every few days, looking for egg masses on the undersides of leaves, tiny holes in foliage, or the telltale yellowing that indicates bacterial wilt. Row covers during the early growing season can protect young plants from these pests, but you'll need to remove them once flowers appear so pollinators can do their job. Companion planting has been a game changer in my garden. Nasturtiums, marigolds, and radishes can help deter squash bugs and cucumber beetles. I also plant trap crops like blue Hubbard squash at the edges of my garden to lure pests away from my main crop. Disease prevention starts with proper plant spacing for air circulation, avoiding overhead watering, and cleaning up plant debris at the end of each season. Crop rotation is essential. Never plant squash family crops in the same location year after year, as this builds up soil-borne diseases. Here's something that might surprise you. Squash plants produce separate male and female flowers, and successful fruit production depends entirely on getting pollen from male flowers to female flowers. Many gardeners panic when they see their plants producing lots of flowers but no fruit, not realizing this is often a pollination issue. Male flowers typically appear first and in greater numbers. They're there to attract pollinators and provide pollen when the female flowers are ready. Female flowers are easy to identify. They have a small, swollen base that looks like a tiny squash. This is the ovary that will develop into your harvest if pollination occurs. The timing has to be just right. Female flowers are only receptive for 1 day, usually opening in the early morning. If pollinators aren't active during this window, or if weather conditions are poor, pollination fails, and the tiny fruit withers and drops. I've learned to take pollination into my own hands when necessary. Using a small paintbrush or cotton swab, I collect pollen from male flowers and transfer it to the stigma of female flowers. This hand pollination technique has saved many harvests when bee activity was low due to cool, wet weather. Environmental stress can also affect flower production and pollination success. Heat stress, drought, or excessive nitrogen can cause plants to drop flowers or produce mostly male flowers. Maintaining consistent growing conditions helps ensure good flower production and successful pollination. These 5 mistakes have claimed more squash crops than all the weather disasters and garden pests combined. But here's the encouraging news. Every single one of these problems is completely preventable with proper planning and consistent care. Start with proper spacing and timing. Give your plants room to thrive and, wait for the right conditions. Establish a consistent watering routine with good mulching practices. Stay ahead of pests and diseases with regular monitoring and proactive management, and don't leave pollination to chance, especially during challenging weather conditions. Remember, successful squash growing is a marathon, not a sprint. It requires patience, observation, and the willingness to learn from both successes and failures. Every season teaches you something new about these remarkable plants. Your squash growing journey doesn't have to include the heartbreak I experienced. Armed with this knowledge, you can avoid these costly mistakes and enjoy the incredible satisfaction of harvesting armloads of beautiful, healthy squash from your own garden. If this article helped you understand the critical aspects of squash growing, please subscribe to Soil Sage Chronicles for more in-depth gardening insights. Share this with fellow gardeners who might be struggling with their squash plants. Together, we can help more gardeners avoid these common pitfalls and create thriving, productive gardens. Happy growing!